The ideas expressed in the following presentations are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of ACI or its committees. ACI web sessions are recorded at ACI conventions or other concrete industry events and will be made available for viewing free of charge for 1 week. Thereafter, they will be archived on the ACI website or added to ACI's online CEU program, depending on their content.
Our next speaker is Roberto Nuñez, and he's from NC State University. Roberto has been instrumental in starting also certification programs in different areas, and he helped several places in Latin America to start the program. He will talk about certification lessons in Latin America immediately. I will also say that Roberto is part of the International Certification Subcommittee, and I think Luke was in this subcommittee that is part of CPC subcommittees. It's a forum and try to help local sponsoring groups around the world to meet their needs, and it was the place where the ACI support program for new sponsoring groups started. Roberto?
Thank you, Caleb. First of all, it's a real pleasure being here, and thank you to the organizers. Thank you for all the people that do certification around the world. And when Khaled asked me to do this, I was thinking I'd like to bring a different perspective to certification, mainly because of the fact that I believe that certification at the international level still lacks some sort of a overall strategy, some sort of a consistent overall strategy by the ACI. If you look at the need globally, what we really have is a significant trend where population is just growing significantly, and the largest degree of the population is concentrated in urban areas. And the largest growth in urban areas is in developing countries. And as a consequence, for example, if you look at sectors of the international community, just in the Andean region from where I'm from, Ecuador, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, the urban growth is significant, about 70% or 75% in the last 3 decades. The great majority of the people move to the cities. As an example, in Venezuela, where we're trying to start a new certification program very soon, 93% of the population is in urban areas. And because of this concentration and because of the exposure to natural disasters, we have the unfortunate opportunity to have a significant amount of losses, property losses and life losses, if a disaster occurs. At the same time, there is a significant difference between the poor and the rich. Is a big divide, and therefore you can have examples like what happened 6 days ago in Medellin, Colombia. I do not know the facts about this collapse. It's a reinforced concrete building with masonry as well. I do not know if a certification of this project would have helped. Because typically is a combination of errors. But I do believe that at some point somebody would have actually seen something that will maybe prevent this from happening. So if you look at developing countries, most of them are exposed to natural disaster risks. If you look at the portion of Latin America, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, they're all in the extreme risk categories. So not surprisingly enough, we have placed, if people in Latin America are working really hard to make sure that we are not running into a situation where the natural disaster loss, the losses because the building is collapsing or the infrastructure is collapsing, exceeds the GDP. I'm not really surprised that Luke is working so hard in Mongolia, where in the year 2000, natural disaster losses almost match the GDP of the whole country. So if you look at this from the global perspective, from the economic, social perspective, what ACI can do is to minimize or reduce the gap between what the risk is in our infrastructure and what the mitigation effort is or is necessary. Now, so therefore, I'm moving towards what is the opportunity for ACI certification as a component of a risk mitigation or a risk strategy. And the answer is, well, if the building code is being used, we have the best opportunity, because if the building code is being used either directly by adoption or indirectly by reference, then ACI has obviously a tremendous opportunity to use certification programs to increase not only the quality of the structure, but also the economic efficiency and the risk mitigation portion of that project. But even if the ACI is not used or reference, what we can do is still use ACI as a guideline to transfer this technology to improve the quality of concrete infrastructure. As an example, I'm part of NC State University. I teach in the construction engineering group. And we have a contract with the military, the U.S. military. And the U.S. military, I don't know if you know this, but they have a group called the Civil Affairs Group. Those are the guys that are being deployed to cities in different countries of the world, and their job is to engage the local community and basically transfer technologies that are fundamentally basic technologies to improve the quality of living. And one of them is what they do is they help rebuild cities. And so we're teaching them, we're training them on basic concrete technology. We're using ACI certification principles to help them go to Costa Rica or to Afghanistan, and to help contractors understand that if they build with concrete, there is not a tremendous departure from what they do. They just basically have to use some basic fundamental quality principles, adopt indirectly ACI certification principles, and improve the quality of their infrastructure. So in doing so, as the topic of the presentation is talk about the challenges and talk about the solutions. Well, the challenges, in my view, I can put them in 4 categories. Finding the right partner, and Luke already discussed about this. It's important to have a partner, to have a local champion. And then overcoming cost and language barriers, because we do have a significant difference in what it costs for us, obviously, to go through training and certification, and what it'll cost to somebody making $5 a day to pay for $200 or $300 worth of certification. Then the issue is make certification a legitimate requirement so it can be sustainable. If certification is not required, it will not have a significant chance to succeed in the long term. And finally, making sure that what the standards and requirements are in the United States are transferred efficiently through to the rest of the world, so the program can be obviously sustainable and the highest quality. So these are the lessons that I've seen, that I've learned through the years. Number one, who is the best partner? Well, I have seen through my work that there are, at least in my experience in Latin America, 3 different groups that can act as the local sponsoring group. It could be the one ACI member, a very distinguished member that came to the United States. He became a member of the ACI. He's prominent, and he got an approval. He got through the approval process to establish an ACI chapter and or a local sponsoring group in Latin America. It could be that an educational university, a university in some place in the country, they decided to form a group and to actually host the local chapter and the LSG. Or it could be that it's a trade association. Some of them have weaknesses and strengths. In the case of the trade association, I found them to be the most sustainable partnership. mainly because they have the resources. They can reach out to a larger audience, and they can, most importantly, exert a direct influence on the building codes and on the construction codes. Educational institutions have been very successful, especially if they have an extension and outreach mission. In other words, in many countries, the universities are actually laboratories that compete locally in the open market, and they provide services through their laboratories to the construction and engineering community. And because of that openness to the public, they have a very good chance to succeed as a local sponsoring group, but at the same time, they engage future professionals because they have students, and the students become later on the leaders in the construction industry, and because of knowledge of certification, they will facilitate the process. I will discourage the issue of having a LSG managed by individual members. At least in my experience, it was not very successful, and the reason for that is because they just don't have the resources and the outreach capacity to make an LSG successful, at least in my opinion. As far as second challenge, cost, language. Well, you can understand, as Luke already talked about this, and as I said before, it's relatively expensive to have documentation that is coming from the United States. Even the shipping costs are expensive. It is very expensive for an ACI member in Latin America or in a developing country to become a member of the ACI or to travel to ACI to participate in a community. There's not a wide acceptance of all the translated documents that will be necessary, and obviously you need a champion. You need a champion on two parts of the world. You need a champion here that is willing to undertake the task of go and do the trainer or the initial steps so the program locally is sustainable. But despite of all these challenges, there are some good things going on. ACI International has seed money for programs. So if you want to start a program internationally, there is an opportunity to obtain seed money to minimize the cost. The ACI free student membership is making a significant difference on certification programs. There is a tremendous amount of interest by the students in foreign countries to become members of ACI after they finish their careers. I will challenge ACI to think about, in either the short term or medium term, not long term, to establish some sort of a ACI membership that is directly related or associated with the country GDP or the country income per capita. I think if we do something like this, that would be a pragmatic way and a very direct way to influence the outreach efforts of a selected group that is now into a more wide, open, effective, efficient strategy towards certification. We do have a tremendous amount of cooperation between different countries and different LSGs, and that is invaluable. There is something that is a trend that I see because of the expenses and because of the cost of certification. Many countries are developing local codes and requirements, and they are adopting their local equivalents of ACI, including some of ASTM, especially ASTM. So what is happening is that by developing and adopting a locally developed, quote-unquote, ASTM standard, the cost of ASTM documents are being essentially bypassed because now the document is locally available, is country-specific, and therefore the students can prepare against these documents and essentially pass the ASTM-based test. There is a renewed effort by the ACI leadership to focus more on translation of documentation, and I'm pleased to be part of that group. There is also more and more globalization is allowing engineers. I have the pleasure of working through NC State with many engineers that were my students. In this case, in the specific case of Ecuador, one of my students right now leads the effort to implement the new building code, and through this engineer, the building code in Ecuador now requires the use and now requires certification, ACI certified technicians to help control the quality of concrete buildings like in the United States. And there is a tremendous growth of locally developed online training programs that are basically reducing the cost of having volunteers from the United States going through different countries and help with the training process. The most difficult part, obviously, is transforming the need into a requirement. How do we do that? Well, we had in these two countries, we had tremendous resistance from the engineering community because the idea was that we were creating technicians, lower level technical people that will compete with the already established engineers. Quality control in some places is still perceived as an increased cost of construction, and the idea is, well, I will help you establish this requirement, but you need to have technicians first. And so, fortunately, many ready-mix industries are already taking the initiatives because they see ACI certification, even though it is not quota required, they see ACI certification as means to keep, maintain, and produce a better product. So, what can we do about what we've done? We've trained engineers on the true cost of quality control. We have invited engineers to become the first certified, and then they become later on either the professional engineer or record for the certification, or they become the supplemental examiners in those countries. We have gone beyond what is ACI certification. We have actually addressed economic issues on what is the cost of rework and how to do the simple calculations. I have an example later on. ACI International is pushing forward with the ACI Ambassadors Program to be able to expand the reach of ACI and to share not only knowledge, technology with local communities. One thing that I also like to challenge ACI is this. I believe that every time one of us go to any country in the world, representing directly or indirectly in ACI, we need to address and talk about ACI certification. If you have seen from information that I got from John Nuñez, if you have checked the state of the ACI organization, certification brings about 1/3 of the revenue of the ACI. That is gross revenue. I do not know exactly, but I do know this, that the net contribution after all the expenses towards net profit of the ACI certification is the largest of any other ACI program. So I believe that any of us, if we go through any other place internationally, we should acknowledge the fact that certification is not only important for ACI International, but also important for the rest of the world. And we have to be honest and loyal about that. Demonstrate success. We have used in some countries, we have basically tell them, why don't you do this if your neighbor is already doing this, essentially. And that seems to always sell because we are competitive. Countries are competitive. Things that I also learned, and they are not really foreign to you, is that in many countries, the engineer, the designer, the person that is actually writing the specifications may not have the right experience. At least in Ecuador, when I remember when I finished school, even though I had to write a thesis, after 6 years of university, I had to write a thesis. The next day, after I finished writing my thesis, I could have actually sit down and be qualified to design a building. And I was able to compete with anybody else. Engineers now invest more time. I finished school in 1982. I measured the ACI code by inches. In my time, the ACI code was about 3/4 of an inch thick. Right now, it's about 1.5 inches thick. So we're doing more work, and we are paying about the same. Not just the United States, anywhere in the world, engineers are getting paid less than 1% of the cost of the project. As a consequence, we engineers in general, not everywhere, we're leaving a lot of information out of the drawings. Drawings are not complete as it used to be, and therefore we're transferring a lot of that into the contractors, and therefore that could create a problem. So we have the first growing trend that I told you before, population growth and urban growth, and at the same time we're having construction going on that may have some, not flaws, but some voids that need to be filled by contractors. So we have to make sure that quality is in place. Many of us in engineering, including me, I did not know exactly when I was going through school in Ecuador that what was the proper way to prepare cylinders. I did not know whether or not I needed to, what was the difference between field curing and standard curing? What was the purpose of that? We have been done, in my experience in certification, we have addressed issues as simple as that with those engineers. Many engineers are not aware of the significance of the over-design process that we're looking for in ACI quality control documentation. As a matter of fact, if you really think about it, our over-design concept already acknowledges the fact that just due to random variation, we're going to have one failure out of 100, excuse me. This is 1%. So the issue is, if we have a problem in construction and we have that 1 in 100 failure, is that a quality problem? Is that a structural problem? Or is that something that I should have expected anyway? So when you look at in our training process to engineers, we address the issue of the processes that we have in place, but these processes of detecting non-conforming events, those are based on the specimens that were manufactured, fabricated, cured, and tested according to a standard. So in many countries, we're trying to enforce the ACI 318, for example, the non-conforming events, with the specimens that may not be compliant to the process that we're trying to control. And going to that sort of training has been a challenge as well. We have essentially told engineers, okay, let's look at this example. This is just an actual example of a training that we've done in Panama to engineers in Panama. Let's say that we have a specification of 4,000 PSI. And we're going to use the non-conforming event decision-making process that ACI 318 establishes. Well, let's say that those are my tests for 2 6x12 cylinders or 3 4x8 cylinders. So I have 4,500 PSI on the first, 4,900, 4,990. My moving average is 4,800. My individual in this case is my individual requirement is 3,500, so everything is okay. We asked the question, if I have a test result of, let's say, 7,710, what would you do? In some cases, the response was, well, what I want to do directly is core the structure. When in fact, according to ACI 318, even though you have that low test, you're going to have to, is in compliance. You have quality compliance and you have a structural compliance. We've asked the same question. Why do you have another one? Well, I'm more concerned. And the answer is no, you're still in compliance with ACI 318. You have possibly a quality problem. And this type of training, we go through and say, well, what is the difference of having a materials concern if the moving average is lower than the specified compressive strength. That is material concern. Or what happens when you have a test result when you in fact have a structural concern? So the exercise that we run with engineers is that we're finding out two things, as I said before. Number one, we're trying to enforce ACI 318 with the specimens that were not fabricated for that purpose or in accordance to that intent. And number two, we're jumping and triggering actions that are not required because we're just not making the correct interpretation. What else we've done? We have basically discussed the fact that ready-mix concrete production is a very variable process. And show some results. For example, show them what is the actual, as an example, what is the actual production and cost of the concrete in the United States? What is the cost of errors? About, according to my little study that I did, it's about 32 cents per cubic meter. So the cost of defects in the United States is about $68 million. If you put the $68 million into perspective compared to the annual production, I argue that the annual defects in the United States is about 0.28%. And we ask the question, well, in the United States, we are at 0.28%. Where are you? Not many people could answer those questions. So I have some other examples about cost, the true cost of rework. And we show that the replacing concrete, some people think that it's just the direct cost of replacing the concrete. And people go back to the profit and loss statements and they say, well, if I was, my cost of rework was $18,000, for example, and my previous cost was $202,400,000. The new cost is $2,418,000. What I'm going to do is just subtract from my previous sales as a company, the cost including rework, and what I see is a reduction of my net profit. We show them to do a return on investment analysis and find out what is the right impact of that rework, and they realize that the cost of rework is actually, in this case, not $3 million to sales to break even, but about $100,000 more, so 5 times the cost of products. And finally, maintaining quality. It takes a champion, it takes a group of people to go there and actually supervise the work, train the trainer in different groups. They become local experts, and sometimes even the rolorimeter, in this case I remember fabricating a rolorimeter in place just to show them what the weight is going to be so they can practice. We have sent layouts on what the setting should be. We have sent translations. This is actually from Mexico, a very detailed list of what is needed for the process to go forward and to be consistent with the expected quality. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and appreciate your time.